and welcome to a special meeting of the Planning Commission. Wednesday, February 5th, 2020. My name is Sean Landris. I'm the vice chair. I am not the chair. Our chair is regrettably absent, and we send our condolences for her family's loss. Could we have the roll call, please? The pledge. See, I'm only the vice chair. Commissioner Fresco, would you lead us in the pledge, please? Now we can have the roll call.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi? Here. Commissioner Fresco?
Here.
Commissioner Pastor?
Here.
Chair Landris?
Here. All right, could we have the planning director's report, please?
Good evening, Commission. At the next meeting of the Commission on February 19th, we have 3 items. One is redefining multi-unit dwellings based on new housing models, the housing process thresholds, and then update and presentation on housing policy work plan. So that meeting is really all about housing issues going forward. March 4th, that meeting will be at the Ken Edwards Center.
On the 19th.
March 4th.
March 4th.
Yes. That evening, we have a variance at 411 Ocean Park Boulevard, and then also an update on the 2019 legislative session cleanups, zoning amendments, and then food hall zoning amendments. So that's looking at food hall citywide. And then on March 18th, we're back in the Civic Auditorium, a CUP at 1820 Broadway for a gym / creative office use, and then a development review permit and map for a mixed-use project at 1448 7th Street. Upcoming at City Council on February 11th, next week, we have the extension of the cannabis IZO. And then that same evening, the Wilshire Boulevard safety improvements that the Commission saw a few months ago. And then on February 25th, a urgency interim zoning ordinance to allow fire stations in the open space zone. And this is particularly or specifically related to a fire station down on the beach. So, and that concludes my report.
Are there questions? Commissioner Fonda.
Will the upcoming discussion on housing policy, will that in any way wrap in the 9,000 SCAG numbers, or is that a separate discussion?
Right, this is giving the commission an update of what we're doing in response to council's direction from December the 10th. So it's kind of giving you a sense of where everything fits in the
so
timeline.
Including SB 50,
Well,
9,000.
SB 50 is dead, but the...
I know, but it's coming back. So.
Or yeah, some kind of version, but certainly it will fold in the RENA process. That's
Okay.
why we're doing this.
Thank you.
So just following up on that, do you think it's, and we had, I think, a letter on this, do you think it's likely that for the next meeting, given that the housing element is due in October 2021, that you would be able to give us sort of a preliminary timeline of what you think is going to happen, not what the decisions will be, but obviously when does it have to go to council if it's due by that date? When does it have to be at planning? What's working backward from that deadline? What should we anticipate?
We have been doing that work. This is not easy to just suddenly figure out. So to plan it all, I mean, obviously we are well aware of all the deadlines, so we don't need to be told about that. But, we will do our best to set forth what the work product and our work plan is in terms of like precise schedules and dates. I don't know whether we can deliver on that, but we certainly can give general sense of things that we'll be looking at, in sort of generally short, medium, long term.
That would be great, especially as we anticipate obviously a continuing flow of projects coming through, just in terms in the interest of none of us going home at 2 a.m. Trying to kind of know what's coming and take it as early as possible. Okay. Any other? Yeah.
I have a question. I see somebody on the dais I don't know.
Sorry, we should introduce Melissa Zach. As you know, she's one of our staff assistants. She actually staffs she's on the ARB Landmarks team, so she primarily staffs ARB. As you know, with Kyle's pending retirement, we're not prepared for this, but
In any way.
we are bringing on Melissa. We'll be working with the commission while we do the recruitment, so you'll be seeing a lot more of her.
Hello, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
When's Kyle's retirement party?
Her retirement party will be March the 6th.
Are we invited?
Yes, you will be.
Thank you.
All right. So I just don't want to get close to that date. Okay, so other questions for David? None. All right, so we'll move on to 5A, and we have the presentation and update on the seismic retrofit program. And can we have the staff report, please?
Good evening, Vice Chair, Commissioners, members of the public. My name is Ariel Sakaris. I'm the Building and Safety Manager. Here to give you an update on our seismic retrofit program. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce two other members of staff that are here with me. First, we have our new building officer, Ara Sargsyan. He started last month. The position was vacant for about a year, and he comes to us from Los Angeles with 17 years of time spent there. And also I have the code enforcement manager here as well, Sharon Guidry, in case both of them are here to provide any support in case any questions come up that I am incapable of answering. So I've provided a similar update to the commission twice before, so I was intending on foregoing any description of the detailed process of what an applicant goes through, but I do see that there are two new commissioners, so if at the end of this you're interested in understanding the applicant process, I do have a slide for that at the end, so I can discuss that. But on this slide, just to remind everyone, the ordinance was adopted in early 2017. The city officially began noticing property owners in the middle of August. This table here shows the notification schedule. As you can see, the 5 different building types were broken up into a series of different phases of noticing so that we didn't have to embark on a 1900 volume mailer for everyone at once. And as a result, the due dates are varied, all dependent on when the notifications were sent out. But at that time, the total number was just a little bit over 1,900. As of today, there are only 2 sets of expiration dates or due dates that are in the ordinance that have passed, and that any property owners who have not complied with would be out of compliance. The first being for concrete tilt-ups and URMs. They both had submittal due dates for submitting plans to the city in May of 2018 for the tilt-ups and in February of 2018 for URMs. And also the URMs identified on the list were required to have their retrofit complete as of August of last year. So moving on to the numbers for the program update, you'll notice that the total changed from 1,941 to 1,943, and those were just tweaks that ended up happening due to a few buildings were misclassified under the wrong building type. There were some buildings that we realized weren't identified or weren't included on the list that we had to eventually end up adding afterwards. So the final number ended up being 1,943. In the second column, entitled RFRs processed, RFR is request for reconsideration. What that it was an administrative process that we put in place, staff put in place as an intermediary process before a formal appeal would be submitted. We essentially gave the property owner an opportunity to submit evidence that a retrofit had been done before on the property, so that if proper information was provided, we could then remove the site from the list administratively, as opposed to having to go through a long process with the Building and Fire Life Safety Commission for an appeal, when in fact we already know and we have the evidence of a prior permit that work had been done, that qualifying work had been done. So you'll see in the various building types, we processed 667 of these requests, and we are still, we still will accept any requests from property owners who want to provide evidence or question the validity of their building on the list. Out of those 667, we ended up removing 456 properties off the total list. The majority of those, as you can see, were soft story buildings. In total, soft stories made up about 80% of the overall list anyways. So the revised totals then took us down to just under 1,500. So in total, the number decreased to 456. So other than that, we continue to work through the program. To date, you can see the plan submittals that we've received for each building type, the number of permits that have been issued, and to date, we've finalized 3 concrete tilt-ups, 3 URMs, 98 soft stories, and 2 steel moment frame buildings. And as I pointed out to you in the last slide, there were a few due dates that had passed. And as a result of those due dates, we've forwarded 21 cases to code enforcement for the URMs which are not compliant with the ordinance requirements. So that's essentially the update of where the numbers stand on the program. Some changes, or not changes, but some features, if you will, that have been introduced since I last presented to the commission. We received a lot of inquiries, requests from not only property owners, but from, I think the Planning Commission even brought it up, but the Rent Control Board mentioned it. At a lot of public meetings, we heard that property owners wanted assistance from the city in how to hire an engineer, how to find an engineer, which contractor to hire. And the city, as is longstanding policy, was reluctant to provide this information because the city doesn't endorse any private companies. So as a compromise or a middle ground for it, we developed this map that lists all of the completed retrofit projects in the city, and within this information is included the contractor name and contractor contact information, so that if a property owner can go to this map and see what jobs have been completed, who completed them, and contact information on how to get a hold of them. This information is available on the PCD website. You see on the left-hand side there's a link for the seismic retrofit program, and it's under the menu of Find an Engineer / Contractor. For the engineer component of that issue, the city worked closely with CIOSC, the Structural Engineering Association of Southern California, in not only developing the ordinance, but assistance in implementing the program. CIOSC is a nonprofit whose one of their missions is to not only promote the profession, but to encourage its ethics and assist the public in finding engineers. So on their webpage, they have a list of licensed engineers that they recommend, that they support. So we simply just link to their page for that information. And again, this map has been on the website for a while, but it's an interactive map that if you search by address, it has the different building types that have been identified as subject to the retrofit ordinance. The building types are coded by color, and there's a menu which gives information such as the date of notice, due dates, and things of that nature. So other than that, that concludes my update, and I'm available for any questions if the commission has any.
Are there questions? Well, why don't we just start with
Yeah.
Commissioner Fondo Bernardi?
I have a few. First of all, it seems that the low-hanging fruit, which are the soft story repairs, let's say, are going very slowly. If all we've done is 100, and we're, what, 2 years into this thing? 3 years into it? Yeah, 98 of all the different soft stories.
Yeah, notices went out for soft stories in between September of 2017 and May of 2018, correct?
Okay, so whatever, we're 3 years into it, and most of those soft stories are on the 6-year cycle, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Their due date varies between September 2023 to July of 2024, but yes, it's 6 years for soft stories.
Okay, so I guess what I'm really concerned about is we're sort of heading for a train wreck. If we're only processing 100 every 2 or 3 years, and we have 1,200 to go, and we start getting close to that deadline, the thing is going to jam up. People aren't going to be able to get through the system, or they're just going to give up and go into code enforcement. And then, so somebody or the other, meaning either code enforcement or a building department, is going to turn out to be overloaded and not going to be able to do their job. So what's the solution here? What do you see coming to avoid a train wreck?
Well, just even the increased workload from the program in and of itself has been an added load to staff.
Sure.
Excuse me. But we have contracts with outside consultants to help with any excessive workload that comes in that they can take on behalf of the city.
So you're feeling that we have enough backup that we can still meet a typical turnaround time for, in this case, I'm concerned about the soft storage because they're the ones that are going to go critical much sooner. What is the turnaround time for a typical soft storage construction?
We have, it's the same for all plan reviews. The first round is typically about a 4-week turnaround to get corrections, and then each subsequent round is 2 weeks. One thing that we did do to help simplify the process for property owners was we instituted a administrative pre-screen, if you will, on the application. There's a series of questions where if you answer in the affirmative or the negative, I don't remember which is, but if you answer the questions properly, then the project won't get routed to planning or the project won't get routed to mobility. It'll always go to building and safety, of course, but it does help at least lighten the load in terms of number of reviewers.
Right. So, for instance, that would be a critical delay. How many of our projects are going through planning or ARB?
I don't have
What percentage would you say if you look at the list that we've...
I haven't looked at that level of detail, so I wouldn't be able to give you an accurate number. One thing I can say about ARB, though, is that a lot, if not all, of these projects are exterior and somewhat minimal, so they would be subject to staff level review. They wouldn't need to go to the formal architectural review board. It could be approved by staff if the proper information is provided at the counter.
Okay. Do these projects have any kind of precedence against all the other things that are flowing through the building department?
No, not currently.
So they stand in line along with everybody else, basically.
Yes.
And you consider that a desirable outcome given how serious this issue is?
Correct. There are the due dates, and we assist as best we can. Like I said, there is a simplified process to help achieve a lesser review time for the soft stories, but there isn't a tracking mechanism to where these come into the system with an earlier due date than they normally would if they were a regular plan check.
And I'm asking you, is that a desirable thing? Do you think they should be processed any differently for any reason than, let's say, the average project, whatever that is?
No, they are processed differently. I just mentioned a simplified process, but all these projects are in compliant with the ordinance, and they're meeting the regulations. I recognize the importance and the significance and the urgency should we have an earthquake, but at the same time, we don't know when that's going to happen, and the workload is what the workload is, and we need to move all projects along as best we can.
Right, but what I'm saying, if we have a major earthquake, which could happen literally any day, it could undo in 10 minutes decades of work of increasing our housing and increasing our affordable housing. So it's kind of critical that some things have to move fast. So if you were to stand back from this and look at this problem, and you were God, do you think it's a problem of carrots or a problem of sticks?
I would prefer not to try to compare myself if I were God.
Well, we got a dispensation from the Pope. You can compare yourself.
So if you can repeat that.
I guess what I'm asking, is it a problem of punishment or incentives from the outside community that is in danger to increase the amount of applications we're getting? What's missing here? We're working really slowly. If we're only processed 100 and we have 1,200 to go, that means it's going to take us at least 12 years and probably 18 years to get through this thing. So that's not a desirable outcome. And in 18 years, we could have 2 earthquakes, is the point I'm making. So I'm asking you, as a person who's got their finger on the pulse of the problem, is it a problem of not enough incentives pushing people to apply, or is it a problem of not enough punishment to encourage people to apply?
What I hear most from property owners is the cost. I mean, to be frank, the city is doing its job. We've passed the ordinance. We've gotten the notices out. We're processing the applications. We have done what we can do other than fill out the applications and get the plans drawn up for the property owners and submit them ourselves. So again, the biggest complaint I've heard from property owners is the fact of this obligated cost being mandated by the city to do work on their property. So
The cost of the permitting process or the cost of construction?
the cost of the the mandate by the city forcing them to do this improvement to their property, the cost of everything. Because otherwise, if we didn't have an ordinance, they wouldn't.
No, we definitely need an ordinance, because otherwise everyone was just going to take the gamble with other people's lives and try to be lucky and sell before the end is near. I'm asking, is there anything else that we can do from the city side to increase the number of applicants?
One thing I failed to mention in the presentation actually is in the middle of last year in July, we submitted a hazard mitigation grant application to FEMA to request assistance for property owners to subsidize part of the retrofit work or part of the retrofit cost. They're very much behind. We still haven't heard back. It goes to the state first. We submitted it to the state in July of 2019. The state then submitted it to FEMA in November of 2019. And the latest I've heard from our consultant who's assisting us with this is that FEMA is just barely getting to simple projects that were submitted to them in 2018. So it still might be a while before we hear back from FEMA on whether or not one will get the money and how we can use it. Well, we know how we can use it if we get it, but it's going to be a while until we get news from FEMA.
And
but that's
what kind of amounts are we talking about here in terms of what would be a FEMA grant, I take it?
Correct. The process that we're envisioning, to get into some more of the finer details, FEMA has a pretty strict vetting process for the types of projects that qualify. There has to be a certain benefit cost ratio for a project, which takes into account the useful life of the building, the number of units, I'm trying to remember some other factors that win, but there has to be a ratio, a minimum ratio that's achieved through their program that they've developed. The only building types so far that the consultant has been able to get to meet the minimums are the soft stories of larger units, of 15 or more units. Mm-hmm. So that right there limits the pool of potential projects that would be eligible. So once we get word that we are going to receive the money or are eligible for the grant money, we would then open up an application process to property owners to see how many property owners are interested in pursuing the program. Once we have a number, we can then compare that to the amount of money that FEMA is willing to give us and then allocate funds from there. The grant program allows a reimbursement of or a rebate of up to 25% of the project costs.
The actual construction and permitting costs, presumably.
Design and construction costs.
Okay. Thank you.
I just have one question. If we can go back to the first slide, and it might just be my bad eyesight. There we go. You have 369 cases hitting in September, 154 in October, another 350 in November. Am I reading that correctly in terms of deadlines for plan submissions? No. Yeah.
Yes.
So 700, 860 odd projects that are due for plan submissions. And I heard you in answer to Commissioner Fondo Bernardi talk about the consultants. Are there any other, I mean, that is a huge hit that they're all going to come in the night before, right? With the best of intentions. Are there any opportunities for streamlining review? Are there templated plans? Are there things that could be made available so that presumably a number of, I mean, obviously every site is different, but a number of these are going to have some similarities that could potentially allow people to work off of something that's standardized at the very least. Nothing?
No, each soft story building is going to be its own. You have different distance of openings, you know, different features, different numbers of openings. So each building is going to need to provide its own set of calculations and details on how that retrofit's going to be done. I will say though that again, given human nature, we have 523 that we received. So, you know, if you want to view it optimistically, hopefully a good majority of those are the ones that are coming up later this year. But it's been in the back of our heads since this ordinance was adopted. We know that plans are going to come in at the last minute, and there's going to be just a tidal wave of submittals, and that we have a total of four consultants lying in wait. 2 of them are specifically for soft stories, and the other 2 are for steel moment frames and non-ductile concrete, which are some of the more complicated.
And about what's the processing time right now? From the time somebody submits a plan to the time you say, okay, go do it.
You know, it's always the magic question with plan review. There's so many factors about responsiveness. You know, how long they hold on to the corrections when they resubmit.
Yeah.
Quality of plans, but realistically, 2 rounds of review, 3 rounds of review at most, a few months.
So in terms of their ability, if we just go back to the previous slide, to be in compliance with the deadline. I'm just looking at the timeline for some of these. You have confidence that the approvals will be given in time for the projects to be completed by the deadline, even if there are inevitable processing delays from 800 projects hitting around the same quarter.
Oh yes,
Okay.
Yeah. The 3 years between the due date for submitting plans and needing to complete the project is plenty of time to do a typical retrofit,
Okay.
or a soft story retrofit, I should say.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Commissioner McKinnon.
So how many properties have been completed?
In the permits final column?
Is that what that means?
Yeah, so we have 106. 98 of those are soft stories.
So do you go out and check them to make sure they did what they said they were going to do?
Our inspectors do, yeah. I don't personally go out and check them, but yes.
I wouldn't expect that. I mean, you're above that. No.
I don't have the qualifications, to be honest.
You are pretty omniscient, though. And when they check them, do they comply, or do they, on some occasions, have to make them go back and do more work, or is the work completed satisfactorily? I mean, how does that pan out?
I mean, typically with any development permit process, there's a series of inspections that are required at certain phases of construction, and there are inevitably corrections and things need to be changed here and there. But if a project is final, it's assumed to have been fully inspected and fully passed by our inspection staff.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much again. All right, moving right along, we are on item 6A and 6B, which are two items on the consent calendar. We have no request to speak. Is there a motion to move the consent calendar, or does anybody want to pull something from the consent calendar?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Can we do this by voice vote? Fantastic. It's been moved by Commissioner Fonda Bernardi, seconded by Commissioner Pastor. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Abstentions? We are moving on to item 7A, 1834 14th Street, Development Review Permit 19 ENT 0328. Are there any ex parte disclosures?
I've walked by the site many times, and most recently, probably 2 weeks ago, and looked at the site.
I have also walked by the site and biked by the site many times. I'll note for the sake of transparency that I serve on a board of directors alongside the applicant's executive director, Tara Baraskis, but that does not constitute any kind of a situation that would require recusal. So I think we are good.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Ross Furman, Associate Planner with the City Planning Division. The request before you is 19 ENT 0328, a development review permit located at 1834 14th Street. The subject property is located in the neighborhood commercial or NC zone district on the west side of 14th Street, across from the Woodlawn Cemetery, between Michigan Avenue and Pico Boulevard. The project consists of 4 parcels that will total 30,060 square feet. The proposed project is a new 4-story, 73-unit, 100% affordable housing project totaling 68,153 square feet with 3,543 square feet of ground floor commercial office space. The project includes 66 vehicle parking spaces in a 1-level subterranean parking garage and 151 bicycle parking spaces. 7,748 square feet of open space is being provided, which will predominantly be located within a central courtyard. As the proposed project is a 100% affordable housing development and located within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop, the project qualifies for new state allowances stipulated in Assembly Bill 1763 and concessions from development standards found in the Government Code Section 65915. Pursuant to AB 1763, the applicant is afforded no maximum controls on density and a height increase of up to 3 stories or 33 feet. The applicant has proposed an increased floor area ratio from 1.75 to 2.27 and has added 1 additional story, bringing the proposed project from 3 to 4 stories. Furthermore, the applicant is also allowed to request concessions from development standards pursuant to Government Code Section 65915 in order to achieve the proposed density. The applicant has requested 2 concessions to reduce the number of residential parking spaces from 64 to 54 and to allow a 5-foot 4-inch height encroachment into the projected daylight plane for properties adjacent to residential districts. The combination of these provisions and concessions allow for the addition of 18 affordable units. The ground floor will consist of 11 residential units, a community room facing out onto 14th Street, a commercial office space located on the rear of the project, and other ancillary uses that will all be positioned around a central courtyard. Vehicular access to the subterranean garage is located here off the alley. The upper stories will consist of a combined 62 residential units, and each floor will have individual common open space. Prior to tonight's hearing, the project went before the Architecture Review Board for preliminary design review on December 2nd. The board was very supportive of the project, specifically the massing scale, openness of the courtyard at the front facade, and their overall design concept. However, the board did point out a lapse in rhythm of the front facade, highlighted in the red box, and made suggestions to the applicant on how to improve the courtyard's programming. In response, the applicant revised the front facade rhythm and is working on a slightly revised courtyard. These 2 images actually show how the project has evolved from the original proposed 3-story 55-unit building to now the 4-story, 73-unit building. And the project will be going back before the Architecture Review Board, hopefully on March 2nd. That brings me to notices were mailed out to property owners and tenants within a 750-foot radius. It was advertised in Santa Monica Daily Press, and we did receive one letter in support of the project. As this project qualifies as a Housing Accountability Act project, staff recommends approval of the development review permit based on the findings and subject to the conditions contained within the draft statement of official action. And I'm here for any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Ross, it must be nice to be moving on to a different housing type after
R1 will live forever somehow.
Only in your heart.
Exactly.
All right. Are there questions for Ross? Wow, we're moving right along. So now the applicant team will have 15 minutes to talk to us, if you'd like. Yes, please. Please come up to the lectern.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Fonseca with Community Corp. And I just wanted to thank all of you for hearing this today. But we had a really great opportunity last May to come across this parcel just down the street. We were located in our temporary offices, and we saw a really great opportunity to take 4 lots and at the time turn it into what we thought would be 55 units. As Ross pointed out, with 1763, we were able to get that up to 73 units. And we did a lot of extensive community outreach. Usually we have 2 meetings. Now for this project we did 4. One of the main comments that we had that I think Don, our architect, did a great job with was the rear alley. If you look at the rear elevation, there's a continuation of the solid void pattern in the back there, as well as some greening. So I think it's a great way to provide some public benefit in addition to the affordable housing. But I'll let Don talk more about the design. And I just wanted to highlight some of the great things we're doing with the project. We have a very aggressive LEED Platinum goal, as well as an 11 BTU per square foot goal for sustainability, using some innovative new technologies on this project that are in alignment with Santa Monica's sustainability goals as well. So if you guys have any questions for me, please, I look forward to answering them. If not,
Maybe we'll hear from, why don't you give us both pieces of the presentation first, and then we'll do questions of either of you. If there are additional comments from
sure.
the architect.
Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Don Impakros, D Architects, 1535 6th Street. We worked a long way to get the 55 unit to work, and I was a little bit shocked when I was asked to add a story to the building. It's not just adding a story, adding units. When you go to 4 stories, there's a lot more responsibility in how to address things. We were fortunate that CCSM had actually gone full blast on the energy model, and they had actually had an analysis, a solar analysis of the courtyard and how where the sun came through. So we actually took out a unit that was lined up with the courtyard at the 4th floor, so to allow that solar ability to still come through. We also added more decks along the front to step it back. I mean, it's 4 lots. We don't get 4 lots in Santa Monica. We don't normally have 2 lots maximum. So we really worked hard at creating an idea of a building that steps down and is inviting from the street. When we went to community meetings, the neighborhood was very concerned about actually having some connection to the street and more greening. We talked to urban forestry. We're going to put a lot of trees along the sidewalk and create the deeper parkway. And the community room is basically designed so it opens up to the outside as the entrance area, so that on the times where the neighborhood is allowed to use the community room, they can actually flow out there, but it also connects into the courtyard as well. We have a landscape architect that's very creative. He wants to create that central court. We have an area that's unexcavated in the middle, and we're trying to take advantage of it. The rain garden, basically, when it rains, the water's going to come, and we're going to try to get to flood into that area. And he looks at it like basically a lily pond for kids to splash around in and put their feet in. So it's really some kind of playing with some very interesting ideas. So it's really, it was a very interesting project. I think it was challenging to get the 73 units to work with the 4 stories. I think the building really came together that way too, so we're hopeful that we get your approval today. And I'm here to answer any other questions. Well,
Thank you. So do we have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Fresco.
Well, first, I just have to say that rain catchment that you were just talking about, that's how they did it in Roman villas, so that's kind of cool. But my question has to do with windows. I noted that there's some really bright, open double windows on the side elevation. The front elevation results in a bunch of bedrooms with teeny tiny little single windows, and I'm wondering if there's a reason for that, or if that's something that you could look at and expand.
Well, actually, the windows aren't as small as they appear. They're actually 3 feet wide, and they're 7.5 feet tall, and they're
they
double,
look tiny.
they're single hung, so that they meet egress requirements as well as they're easy to open up. So if you think about it, 3 feet's this and 7.5 is that. So it's actually, if it was a linear window, it'd feel very big. So it just appears
The
that way.
small ones on the front to elevation
They're all
are
3
that big?
Yes, they're all 3 feet, yes. So we were asked by
Okay.
CCSM to make them single hung, and if they're any narrower, they don't meet the egress requirements.
Right,
So
right.
we came up with a formula that way. So they're
I
big
see.
windows, actually.
They are big.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a relief.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In your garage plan, there's a large area next to the unexcavated area that's not occupied with anything. What's the intent for that
Well,
area?
CCSM, the commercial space in the back is actually their maintenance offices and for storage and the whole bit. They have a lot of employees, and we don't have room to put extra parking in there. So the idea is they can park in tandem in that area. The city doesn't look at it, doesn't count those in parking spaces officially, but there's ability for them to have extra spaces that way. So
Okay,
that's
so
what it was.
they're perfect for compact
Right,
spaces.
right.
Okay. The other question I have is, it seems that the trees in the courtyard kind of line up with the unexcavated area, but not completely.
They do. I mean, the landscape
really?
architects working on that stuff right
Yeah,
there.
I
That was
know. Just-
they had 2 weeks to put the original package together, so.
No, I
they-
understand,
they've actually,
but,
But no, they definitely will. We don't want to have trees over structure where it's just, they don't grow that well, so the idea is to take advantage of that unexcavated area.
Well, I guess something's going to have to move. Either you're going to rotate the parking of the bikes, because when you do that evil thing of scaling the drawings with this absolutely perfect pen here, they don't quite line
No,
up.
but they should, so yeah, I'll make sure they do when we submit the
Okay,
ARB.
thank you.
Any other questions?
How many employees are you going to have on site?
So just to preface this, we actually already have our maintenance staff on site. There are about 21 employees employed by that department right now. And in our long-term plan, we expect to add around 10 more, so around 30, 31.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just have one question about the process, the construction process. You're in construction just north of that site, right, with CCSM? Correct. And so you'll be in construction here. I was looking at the construction plan requirements, and you were great in other places, so I just want to make sure that this will remain the case. The 14th Street bike lane is really frequently used, and including by your staff. What do you think is the best way to ensure that during construction, not only that bike lane will remain accessible to everyone, but that there will be clear instructions given to contractors and others to keep the bike lane clear? Just during construction, I'd like to make sure that there's safety and safe access there.
Can I just clarify one thing? Greenway Meadows will be completed by December. This
Okay.
project won't start construction until probably next April.
Okay.
So they're not going to be,
That's good, but even so, do you have a plan in place just to make sure that, I mean, Greenway's been great, so I assume it's going to be the same, but wanted to ask
Yeah,
the
we'll
question.
be continuing the same practices we have on construction with Greenway, with an individual on site being, cognizant of any neighborhood concerns or any kind of obstruction that might be caused by the construction process.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We have, oh, yes.
Where is the encroachment that you wanted in terms of the cutoff angle? It's not exactly showing.
It's on a section. There's a section past the plans. It's really, yeah, right there. If you look on the top left, it's just a small piece that cuts through the very top of it. And the building, the way it steps in, it only encroaches on the piece that pops to the front. Yeah.
Is it this one?
Yeah, yes, it's just, well, it's just in the alley. The very top part of it is just a really small encroachment.
Okay. We have one request to speak. Jerry Rubin, the lectern is yours.
Thank you very, very much. Jerry Rubin, Santa Monica resident, commissioners, city staff, fellow Santa Monicans. Well, I went to a few of the community meetings they had. They were very good. And I've always been a supporter of Community Corps and realized how much good they do for Santa Monica over the years. I don't think it should be that hard in the future to get projects like these to go to 4 stories. I think it would help the city, help with the housing we need so desperately. I'd like to see more Community Corps projects in all the neighborhoods. I know a while ago there used to be people that came out and protested. Even in the Ocean Park area many years ago, we have a beautiful Community Corps building, and there was all these doomsday scenarios that never came true. It's always been a tremendous benefit for the community. And whether it is for all housing or whether you have some commercial projects on the bottom floor, I'm in full support of having more, and I think the design is excellent. I'm glad they're adding more, and really appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I move we approve Development Review Permit 19 ENT, and I move we approve the Statement of Official Action.
Is there a second? Second. Okay. Moved by Commissioner McKinnon, seconded by Commissioner Fonda Bernardi. Is there discussion on the motion? I had Commissioner Pastor in the queue.
Okay.
And then Commissioner Fresco.
I really just have, like, say a couple comments. This, and let's keep it short. This project is fabulous. I sit in the board of Affordable Housing Organization. I would be proud to have this as one of our projects. I would be proud to have this as a market rate project. It's great. It's super thoughtful. It's going to activate the street. We're really lucky to have it in our community, and it's a testament to your community outreach that there's basically nobody here to oppose at all. So great job. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Fresco.
I'd like to say a few things.
I have Commissioner Fresco next.
I just wanted to, I agree it is a great project, but I am a little hung up on those windows, and I wanted to see if it would be friendly to just ask the ARB to just make sure that those bedrooms that are overlooking the beautiful Woodlawn Cemetery, founded on November 26, 1875, to make sure that, you know, they're as big as they can be and that those bedrooms are as delightful as they can be. So just to look at that.
I think the architect said they were 7 feet by 3 feet. So are you suggesting they should be bigger?
I don't know. Have you ever been a middle-aged woman trying to sleep in a room with a window? More is better. Trust
I
me.
do have some experience
Windows
of how
in
hot it can
bedrooms are
be.
really,
Yes,
really
I
important
understand
to
the point
certain
you're trying to
classes
make.
of people. So it's just, you
Why
know,
don't we
I mean,
insert-
I think it's wonderful, but it's just something to look at and to have one more conversation about before.
Why don't we put a
it's
note
done.
in there that the ARB look at the size of the windows?
Just, yeah.
I
Friendly
accept
to the
that.
seconder as well.
I'm not going to argue.
Okay.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Could you turn your mic on, Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
I'm sorry.
You need to turn the mic on.
Okay. So I think this is more than fabulous. I think from a planning point of view, this project is perfect. And I'll tell you why. First of all, it's perfectly positioned between 4 institutions of learning, walking distance to elementary school, walking distance to a junior high school, walking distance to a high school, and certainly walking distance to the college. So you couldn't place it better in terms of location. The next thing I like about it is these are real 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. They're not the bogus ones we've been seeing that are really 3 one-bedroom studios in disguise pretending to be a 3-bedroom. These are real units. The third thing is this is only a 4-story building, which means it can get very close to being a net zero building. It's not going to be a net zero building, but it could probably get there. And you could probably stretch the amount of area dedicated to solar collectors on the roof, because you got some generous spaces, 7 feet, where you're leaving some photovoltaics on the table, and I think you would want to recapture those, particularly when we go to electrically charging our cars. That's even though that we've reduced the number of cars, those cars are likely to be electric in the life of this building. So the other thing is the same thing that Commissioner Fresco mentioned. You know, looking onto a park is really a good thing for people. When you see those trees, which Jerry Rubin loves and we all love, that helps you no matter what. It's always kind of a lift to see greenery. In this case, it'll be trees and some grass. But there are very few buildings that are oriented looking directly onto. It's all like the only buildings that really have that are, for instance, I would say the buildings along that look on the south side of Tongva Park have that same relationship. So it's a great relationship to that. And then the last thing is that this is something that does help our jobs housing imbalance, because it's not adding any, let's say, ground floor commercial, which tends to get wasted in these affordable housing projects. And it's not destroying any businesses or any work. It's just adding housing, which is what we need to do our, basically, improve our housing jobs imbalance. And we're only adding, let's say, affordable units, 100% affordable units, meaning we're not paying the penalty to get 4 affordable units. We have to absorb 8 or 20 or 100 market rate units. We're getting full value for our dollar, and that's very valuable to us as a city, and obviously very valuable to Community Corp. So I think this is a wonderful project. It's perfect from a planning point of view. Congratulations. And whoever found the land, whoever closed the deal, whoever got the design, they should get a substantial raise.
I would just note that's a very rare accolade from Commissioner Fonda Bernardi, a perfect project, so take it as a badge of honour.
So I'll just add a couple of comments. I share the enthusiasm of my colleagues. I will note that the ROI that we just passed I think they may have been effusive, because this might be one of the last times that we get to see them, because maybe they'll go through faster if we have the discussion and move it to council the way that we seem to be intending to do, which is a very good thing. I want to make 2 additional comments. I agree with just about everything that has been said. This would be a great market rate project. This is a great affordable project. It's so much better because it's an affordable project. As someone who uses 14th Street quite a lot, I'm really excited about activating that street in this way. I think that the people who will be living on that street will bring extraordinary change to the community in a very positive way, and I also think that the building itself is just beautifully sited in the context of that neighborhood, and so I'm really excited to see that come into being. I also want to say that couldn't be more enthusiastic, and if Commissioner Lambert were here, she would say something similar, I'm certain, about this creative use of the density bonus. That you used it. I want to argue that we need to see more use of these density bonuses, 1763, the statewide density bonus, which we've talked about before, number 1, and number 2, that you used it creatively. You didn't just come in and say, I want my 2 stories. You actually added density to the project in a way that was contextual. And it made it, I think, easier for all of us who see these density bonuses to visualize what that can mean in a context that is not simply about height, right? It's also about the full use of the parcel. I think that's very important, because I hope that as more projects make use of the density bonus, and I would note that this is neighborhood commercial, so this is a particularly sensitive zoning area for many parts of our city, that this is a potential model. And I think if anyone out there is listening or looking at future projects that take advantage of it, this is a great model to look at, that you can change the way you use the site. So with that, I'll add my enthusiasm, and I'll miss, if we go to AA, I'll be very happy to see these kinds of projects move forward, especially those of this quality. I'll miss, being able to celebrate them with you here, but I'll take it if it means we can get more people into the housing that they can afford, and provide some equity in our community. So with that, unless there are additional comments, we could have a roll call on the motion as friendlily amended, to ask ARB to take a look at those windows.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner McKinnon?
Yes.
Commissioner Pastor?
Yes.
Chair Landris?
Yes. And that passes.
And the STOA.
And the STOA. We'll have the roll call on the STOA.
Commissioner
I
Fonda?
thought we were voting. Did you move both?
You need to have two.
Okay.
Two
I
votes,
did
yeah.
move both. And Commissioner Fonda
Seconded both.
He did
Yes.
say that.
We were falling over each other to get this done.
Commissioner Fonda?
Yes.
Bernardi? Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner McKinnon?
Yes.
Commissioner Pastor?
Yes.
Chair Landris?
Yes. Great. So moving on now to item 8A. This is my item, actually. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about it, and we'll have some discussion, and perhaps come back to it at future meetings sooner rather than later. It just happened that tonight I was talking with my 9-year-old daughter. And we have a request to speak on this item. That I was talking with my 9-year-old daughter, and she was complaining that I had to go to another meeting. And I was explaining to her that we would be looking at a housing project that might help people who couldn't afford to have somewhere to live, maybe have somewhere to live. And she said, but it's taking too long. And of course she's right, which is why we did the ROIs earlier this evening to look at that. But part of the process that requires some review, I think, is also the bigger question of what actually goes into these statements of official action, what goes into our conditional use permits, what we would like to see if we move to administrative approvals for additional projects, what additional requirements that the Commission has traditionally added over time do we want to make sure are included in these administrative approvals. This is a matter of not making more things a yes. It's getting to a yes or getting to a no faster with clarity and transparency. This is not raising or lowering the bar, although we could talk about that, but again, clarifying and simplifying the process. We're entering an economic downturn. We have a lot of vacancies that we see, commercial vacancies. We have a need for housing that the state has identified, that the city has identified. Markets want certainty, and as a matter of, I think, the health of our city, the economic health of our city, we want to encourage as clear and simple a process as possible. And so I want to kind of break this down into 3 parts. What objective standards, additional objective standards we might want to see in code, how we might simplify or standardize language for our statements of official action, whether for our purposes or for administrative approvals, and what would have to happen. And what opportunities, part of this is really motivated by a deep appreciation for the incredible planning staff that we have. They're very thoughtful. What additional discretion can we give them to address issues with certain kinds of projects? And I want to give some examples so folks have a clearer sense of what I'm talking about, and then see perhaps how we might move this forward. So in the idea of the code changes, 2 things that we talk about fairly regularly are the restriction on medium-term housing, the requirement that we would want new Housing Accountability Act, or really any residential project, to be focused on natural persons who intend to live here permanently. We've been adding that as a STOA condition. I believe we're having some new housing model language come to us later, but we may want to call that out to council and suggest that we need an ordinance to really clarify that if we're doing this housing, we want it to be for the people who need it. A second thing that we do on a regular basis is our wraparound support service and case management requirement that gets volunteered for the affordable units. One option might be to move that from a STOA requirement to our AHPP, so it becomes a function of the AHPP rather than a function of the land use process. Same outcome, and perhaps we don't need it for, say, the moderate rate units, but it's the kind of thing that we're constantly putting into our STOAs. We could move it to administrative action. When it comes to the statements of official action, we've had conversations about trying to avoid language in our STOAs that replicates other code or creates confusion vis-a-vis other ordinances or California law, definitional issues. We might want to look at one additional thing I might like to add to STOAs is requiring consistency in circulation planning, specifically with our bike action plan and our pedestrian action plan as a kind of a standard clause so that we know that that's addressed in administratively approved projects. Looking at STOAs for CUPs, how do we avoid what happened a couple of weeks ago when we wanted to have that conversation about music at the Santa Monica Brew Works, but there was an issue with noticing how could we create a process that says, look, anytime there's a CUP coming, anything that's in the CUP can be discussed or amended on the spot, or we streamline the reapplication or reconsideration, right? So that, again, is maybe that's not a question of rewriting a STOA, but looking at our noticing so that the public understands that if this is going to be on the agenda, we as the Planning Commission could go anywhere. I think a longer conversation is actually going through our CUPs to see what could become an administratively approved permit as opposed to something that has to go to planning. When we look at staff discretion and staff approval, I think 1828 Ocean is a really good example of something where there was this question of its relationship to the Housing Accountability Act, and we had the choice between a great project that needed a simple variance on the, if you remember, with the sidewalk grade at the corner, versus a code compliant project that would have dropped into the Housing Accountability Act bucket, but just didn't look as good and wasn't as great in addition to the community. Could we figure out a way to give the staff discretion or lower the threshold for what a variance is so that those types of architectural design issues, we can rely on staff to ensure that we get good projects rather than risk that an applicant would come up with something not so great looking that is code compliant for the purpose of HAA approvals. So those are some examples. My request of my colleagues would be that because we have these items coming up on the 19th and the 4th, and we're going to council fairly quickly with some recommendations, some of these may not be able to be changed before we go to council, that maybe we take some time, everybody, to look at STOAs, think about these different buckets of where we might want to make some recommendations to council to streamline our processes. I know, the last thing I want to say is that I'm also aware that staff is working very hard to streamline its procedures and internal handling of permits. There's a lot of exciting work going on with the permitting system itself that should make this a lot less painless, and they're also working diligently to streamline where they can. There's also I think some very exciting work happening around the promenade where there may be opportunities to experiment with a lighter touch that could be piloted there and then tested out for applicability elsewhere in the city. But if we are going to go to this administrative approval structure, I think it is appropriate for the commission to have an opportunity to say what it would like to see added to those requirements, but then also find some opportunities for us to still help streamline the process. So we have one request to speak. Maybe we can hear from the public and then go to discussion. Jackson McNeil.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jackson McNeil, attorney for Harding, Lamar, Kutcher, and Kozel. As you know, our firm sent in an email asking you to clarify or expand the ROI that was agendized as item 6B. Obviously, that item has passed, but I think that some of the issues that we raised in that email go to some of the same issues that Sean is raising in this item. And so I just wanted to raise them again real quickly for you now. And as a reminder, we basically requested that you consider two process changes. One, consider removing the DA requirement for Tier 3 housing projects. In the downtown, for instance, we've already decided that in the transit adjacent district, that's an appropriate location for Tier 3 height and density. It's been vetted in a public process. So let's make it easier to build those projects. And two, and this kind of goes to what Sean was discussing, consider a streamlined ministerial approval process, not just for housing projects and not just for HAA compliant projects, as that certainly was an issue in 1828 Ocean. And finally, we also want to ask the Commission to work on a publicly available plan and timetable for considering all of the housing reforms that are needed to comply with the city's enormous RHNA allocation and housing element obligations. It sounds like that's something that staff is already working on, but there's obviously a long and complicated journey ahead of you. The RHNA allocation is enormous, and we think that a comprehensive public timetable and plan is needed. Some of the suggestions you may not think fit into this item that is being raised right now. I honestly wanted to give you the treat of avoiding a lengthy discussion on a consent calendar item. But nevertheless, if you need to bring back a new ROI for these process items, you absolutely should. They're low-hanging fruit. They would be useful, and you should absolutely consider them. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. McNeil, do you have some specific clients that this would benefit these changes, with these changes?
I am not here on behalf of any specific clients. We have had clients expressed interest in removing the DA requirement for Tier 3 projects, because for a run-of-the-mill housing project that's, a larger project, a DA requirement is just really unappetizing.
How many?
How many
clients?
I'll say at least one. But I mean, it's not like we've gone around and polled our clients. This is something that comes to us. It's not like
they spontaneously tell you this.
Right, exactly.
So at least one.
But, all right, but there could be more for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one question, unless you wrote in your letter, you alluded to a disagreement that had come up, I believe, in the context of 1828 Ocean over what constituted a Housing Accountability Act compliant project. To summarize, the earlier position had been that a project could get through a variance or a modification and then become compliant. The new position that our city attorney has taken, and we are obligated to follow at the moment, is that a project that is not fully compliant at the time of submission loses the HAA protection, as it were, for the duration of consideration. Do you think that there could be some middle ground there with respect to giving, if we were to move some projects to administrative approval, giving staff more flexibility to resolve those variances or modifications in a less formal way?
I think the answer may be, regardless of staff's legal position on what the HAA says. The point of the HAA is to encourage housing production. It would not be illegal or against the spirit of the law to essentially allow for a more liberal interpretation of the HAA, or to institute a program that allows ministerial approval of projects that require a modification or waiver or variance once those modification waivers or variances are actually granted.
Okay, thank you.
I want to follow that up
With him or with us?
with him, first of all. So it makes no difference whatsoever if there's administrative approval of a building, if there's a variance. According to the city attorney, if there's a variance, it doesn't get covered by the Housing Affordability Act, correct?
Right, but
So that just rules it out. So if there's a variance, no Housing Affordability Act.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that the city could institute a program to provide for that sort of ministerial approval regardless. Just like for the state density bonus law, for example, the state density bonus law requires cities in certain instances to grant density bonuses. But that doesn't mean that the city can't grant a density bonus regardless, even if it's not specifically required by the state density bonus law.
But wait, you come in with a building which complies with the zoning code. It doesn't produce a building that's an acceptable building. That was the building down on Ocean Avenue. You ask for a variance. You get the variance. No Housing Affordability Act. How would ministerial approval resolve that?
I guess I'm suggesting that the city could, if the city maintains its legal position, which...
Well, it appears to, because it's the city attorney. She hasn't shifted in the last year or two.
Right. I guess I'm suggesting there's nothing necessarily precluding the city from instituting its own ministerial approval process for a project in that instance.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. Actually, it's a kind of a question for staff, and that's that one of the places where a sixth of our city loses a lot of time is the two-track process of having to go through all the city approvals and then having to go through coastal. Now, somewhere along the way, we were promised that these two processes were going to align and become one process.
That's right, yeah.
And I would like to know how we're doing and when is that going to happen?
Well, we've got our expert sitting right there.
So just an update on that. So the LUP has been submitted, the land use plan portion of the LCP has been submitted to Coastal Commission. Unfortunately, they will not be able to agendize that. I think at the earliest now is May, I think April of this year. So we're hopeful they'll be able to stay on track with that schedule. And we have a certified LUP. We're currently working on the coastal zoning ordinance portion, of that. But that is that's a very complicated work. You're doing a zoning ordinance for the coastal zone, largely based on our existing zoning ordinance, but there are brand new sections, for example, like sea level rise, which don't exist. No examples of those exist in the state. That you're literally making it up. So, not literally making it up, but no precedent with it. So that work is happening right now, and we'll keep going on for a while.
Okay, so in that same vein, it's now May, and we've got our local coastal plan approved. Does it cost any more permit-wise to get approved in these alleged coastal zone than in the other 5-6 of the city?
So to clarify, once the LUP is certified, applicants will still have to go through that two-phase process. The process of bringing it in such that someone just has to go through just the city and the city acting, issuing coastal development permits will not occur until after the coastal zoning ordinance is certified.
And what's the timeline for that?
We are working actively on creating that language, to be consistent with the brand new policies in the LUP. So, I think the work is taking longer than probably we would like, but it's going to be, I think, we were on a timeline to try and finish by 2-ish years, I think, something like that.
2 years. So,
Yeah.
for instance, our Commissioner McKinnon will not reap the benefits of that.
Essentially, yeah.
I may be the longest serving planning commissioner in history. And just
Okay,
to see
well,
this through.
you're going to have to re-enlist. Okay, thank you.
Just a follow-up question to that. Have we gotten any feedback from Coastal on the LUP?
On the LUP, we have, yeah.
And how's it looking?
They largely are actually very supportive. Santa Monica is somewhat unique coastal jurisdiction. We're not isolated like a lot of places. So we've been able to carve in, or at least the staff has agreed with us, in terms of approaches to mobility and what have you. We have a couple of sticking points, that I think we've shared with the council and are known. But largely, we are in agreement, I would say, on like 99.5% of the document.
Wow. Congrats. I mean, let's not count our chickens, but that's pretty good.
So are there, yeah.
I have a couple comments and questions. Heidi, can you, maybe I was not here for the legal interpretation of Housing Accountability Act and what qualifies. Can you outline that for me?
Sure. So, and I think we were maybe talking about a couple of different things in our earlier discussion. So the reason why we've been talking about moving what we consider to be, which I think the law considers to be an HAA compliant or subject to the HAA project, to administrative approvals is because an administrative approval, when staff approves an administrative approval, it's because it's a code compliant project. Mm-hmm. So projects that meet all of the objective standards are code compliant. So that's an HAA subject project is code compliant, therefore it could be administratively approved.
And does that, finish, sorry.
Right, so that's the ministerial approval, yes or no, up or down on all the questions. Discretion comes into place with our major mods, waivers, and variances. So that's kind of the separate set. What the city attorney clarified, I guess it has been about 2 years, is that a project that comes in and asks to the Planning Commission for a waiver, a modification, or a variance is not subject to the protections of the HAA because it does not meet all of the objective standards. Hence you need the variance or the waiver. Now, as you all know, that does not mean that the city is precluded from approving the project. It just means that the city has more discretion to possibly reduce density or deny the project.
And does that well, let me ask it a different way. Is a project that is a density bonus project that asks for an incentive or concession pursuant to 65915,
right,
is that HAA compliant?
So the law says that if you get a density bonus, you are not taken out of being code compliant.
Okay. And that's the position our city attorney takes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Landis, for bringing this up. I am not really ready to talk about it. I would, we heard from Mr. McNeil, and we've heard, I think, before from your law firm about taking things out of tier 3, making them easier to approve, and taking things out of development agreements. And, I think that's all very fine and well and good, and I totally understand why you're asking. I think those are hard asks. And as a sort of fairly new commissioner and someone who didn't do a lot of work here, I would like to hear from your type of constituency and others, also neighborhood folks, on what some of their perceptions of what could streamline things are. Because I know that when you're in the weeds day to day, like the minutia is the minutia. And so I would encourage you all to think about what some of those recommendations are that are perhaps in a more bite-sized piece than just removing development agreements.
Any other comments?
So I was not here earlier for the discussion about how we're going to proceed on the resolutions of intent. But having been a member of this Planning Commission for 9 years, I think that when we came and looked at the zoning code and the downtown community plan and the Bergamot area plan, we wrote discretionary reviews in as part of it as a result of what had been issues in development and discussion and politics over the previous 15 years, including the outcome of what I now consider the most disastrous piece of legislation, the IZO, which set us up for a development agreement on everything. And so I don't know how many development agreements I've sat on. Some people had one in a career of 10 years, and virtually every meeting we had one, if not two, for four-storey buildings downtown. So I've come to the conclusion that the DRP process is unnecessary, that we should ministerially approve those. And as much as possible, things that are code compliant or code compliant within a percentage should not come to the Planning Commission. That is a complete waste of time. We don't do anything here. Commissioner Fonda Bernardi, for example, always makes a big thing about sustainability, and it's a great thing. He asks about solar panels, etc., and the developer sits there knowing that because they're code compliant, they don't have to do anything else. So we need to change the code or the standards and then say, right, that's a done deal. And that introduced certainty into it. So that's where I'm going. And I think the second thing is we've now reached a turning point. And the turning point is that we have two things that have come together. The first is that glaciers are melting in Greenland and Australia's on fire, and we have now seen the impact of environmental change. And so we now need to think about our cities and the way we develop those cities differently. And the second thing is we've been given a remit by the state to put 9,000 extra units into the city of Santa Monica. So the issue for all of us is, where are those units going to go? And what is the impact of them? And if we think about that for a minute, 9,000 units, 6 times the development rate of the past 20 years, every year for the next 9. But if we put 5,000 units into the downtown and 3,000 into Bergamot and 1,000 somewhere else, there's going to be a huge number of buildings being built everywhere. And so the issue really we've now got to grapple with is, how high should the buildings be in what part of the city, what sort of density there should be, and then we should step back. So we should set those standards, make it very clear, and go forward. And I think these are going to be difficult discussions. 5,000 units in the downtown is really, given the nature and number of developable lots, that's going to be a striking building as they're built. But even more so, we have small buildings on the boulevards creating enormous ructions. If we have 5 buildings out there, 3 along Wilshire and a couple along Lincoln that are 100 units, or even 70 units, these are quite big buildings. And we're going to see that in Bergamot. We might see it in Memorial Park. So that's a serious discussion. But at that point, I then think that we state what we want in terms of sustainability, in placement, in a whole series of standards, and then take ourselves out of it. Because what tends to happen is we have these arguments that erupt about things that we almost can do nothing about. And so that's the direction I'm going to be moving in, and I think we need to be particularly supportive of clustering development around the train stations to preserve the residential areas of R1 as much as possible, and on major transport arenas, and we should be looking for affordable housing as much as possible and making that as inexpensive to build in our city as we can. And so that's the thrust of where we're going. And so if you're arguing, which is not exactly what you said, but in terms of permit removal, setting objective standards that people will know well ahead of time, shortening the processing so that people will say, oh, okay, it's going to the City of Santa Monica, it's not an endless open proposal, it will be completed in 18 months, come what may, then I think that's a good direction for us to be going. And I think we should be saying that very clearly as one of our work objectives over the next few months. That's what we're intending to do. I think we should also say to the City Council, as a result of these directions that we've been given by the state and by these imperatives on the environment, there are some things that we think they need to be thinking about pretty urgently. That hasn't been the direction to us, it's been affordable housing. We need to be saying, as the planning body here, these are the things you need to be considering. You don't have a lot of time. You have until, 2021? Well, I know you're rushing, but time slips away from all of us. So there's a time imperative. We have state directions. We have environmental directions. We now need to bring our community with us to a point where they understand why we're doing these things, and I think that's a major exercise. But for me, that's the direction I'm heading in as a commissioner sitting here over the next few months. So I'd urge the rest of the commission for us to think about that and then chip into how we do it. And if we want more sustainability, and I do, let's raise it now and tighten the standards and make it really hard for these guys so they can't just go, well, Commissioner Fonda Bernardi, that's a very interesting point, but I've done what I have to do. I contributed at the office. That's not what we want to see.
Right. And that's why I raised the question, because there may be some things that we can put into an administrative approval STOA that Commissioner Fonda Bernardi would like to see in every administrative approval STOA, that we could figure out how to get that in there so that anybody who is bringing a project for administrative approval at least has to contend with the questions that he has posed consistently over the years to a number of projects. And there may be different ones for each of us, so I would invite kind of bringing that back. But I think, Heidi, you raised a really interesting question from a policy standpoint, which is, you said when it's not Housing Accountability Act protected, the city has the right to either deny the project or reduce the density, which somehow implies that a reduction in density is the default negotiation position, precisely at a time when we have heard council say we ought to be establishing our density limits, and then we ought to be seeing people build to those envelopes, right, to those density envelopes. So in the case of the 1828 project, I think that's a great use case. I don't know how you resolve it legally, but the use case where that wasn't a question of density. I mean, yes, it would have been some leverage, but we had a policy that there was zoning for the area. We weren't being asked to, the applicant wasn't even asking for the full envelope. They were asking for a design improvement that everybody agreed made the project better and more accessible to the public because of the and more even better ADA wise. So that's the kind of a variance where maybe at the administrative approval level, the city ought not to be thinking of reduction in density against a council approved envelope as a point of leverage. Denial maybe when it's a bad project. But that would have been an example for me where if it was HAA, you all said, yeah, great, that looks so much better, go, right? I don't know how we write that, but we didn't need to spend hours saying, yeah, we all agree with what you've already told us, because you already knew that it was the right way to go, and it was inside the envelope. So maybe looking for ways for the test really to be, is this grounds to really deny the project? If it is, then maybe the Planning Commission needs to take a look at it. But if it's really grounds to, if it's only grounds to reduce density, and in fact it's a variance that would improve the quality of the project, these very well-trained folks and their colleagues, I think, probably know as much, if not a great deal more than we do about what constitutes a great project.
So, Chair, and I guess the question is to Mr. Martin and his staff, and people at work here. What steps do we now need to take to advance this discussion and turn it into some sort of decision?
Yeah. So when we come back on the 19th, we're going to look at the first of these ROIs related to housing thresholds for administrative approvals and for administrative approvals of 100% affordable and for potentially HAA compliant projects. If we move to administrative approvals in those respects, for those types of projects, that will raise the question of, is there anything we would like council to add to those administrative approvals that aren't currently in the AA documents that would only come up through planning? I gave two examples, which was the medium-term housing restriction and the wraparound support or case management requirement. Is there anything else from the breadth of our interests and expertise that we would like to see added? If so, what we ought to do is, in the context of the red line work, then give direction to staff or recommendations to staff that they can then forward to council and say, so that as council is considering it, they can then turn around and say, yes, and we'd like to close this loophole and that loophole and the other loophole.
So that will require the agenda to be written in a certain way, if that's the case.
So I just want to, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Because I keep hearing like STOA changes. So I want to clarify that what's in the AA, you're talking about amending the zoning ordinance. So they'd have to be code changes. So
okay.
I think one of the things that would be helpful for us to hear is whether it's concepts or ideas, right, of things that you would like projects. So it's really more outcome based, you know, in terms of what are you expecting in terms of that. And then we can work backwards, because I want to be very transparent that there may be things that we cannot codify.
Agreed.
Right, that cannot become an objective standard. And I'm hearing a little bit between walking the line between black and white objective standards and then giving staff some judgment, which by its very nature is not objective, right? There's some judgment in there, and you might not like what we have to break it down to get to a yes or no answer. You know, so I think we can start with the concept. We will try and figure out, I don't know that we can bring everything back on the 19th. We were intending to bring back really just the first phase of this, what was easy, because that was council's top priority, was we have to move forward on 100% affordable housing. That's not even a question. But the rest of, these things on HEA compliant market rate projects, or these other things that we brought about process, about housing, if there's interest in adding more things on there, we may have to pause a little bit to assess, right, what that means.
Right, but what we had to discuss was, for example, we would do the red line, and then what we would add as a comments to council or recommendations to council, so that what the staff report going to council would say is, here's the red line, and Planning Commission thinks you ought to look into writing an ordinance that accomplishes the following objectives. And if you'd like to do that, council, please give direction, and if you don't, then we'll simply keep going. But the issue is they're on a timeline. We need to be on a timeline. But some of these things we can't hold up administrative approval, to solve the case management requirement. We've got to sort of tell council that that's an issue. My observation would be, let's move that over to the AHPP, because that's what it's tied to, and take it out of the land use document entirely. You have the same outcome, but you get there on a different path. The council is looking into the question of renting to natural persons and intended permanent residents. I feel very strongly that if we are obligated by the Housing Accountability Act to approve a project, it ought to be for people who want to live here, not people who are here temporarily, right? But council hasn't worked that completely through. We could call it out for them and then keep going. That's, I think, the best.
So the wider issues are going to be that we have in the DCP 7 zones in the downtown, which have varying height requirements and density. Bergamot has a scattershot approach, because that was a different thing, so there's a shifting parking requirement depending on how much is built out, where you are, and so on. They're the tough discussions about where 9,000 units go. When are they coming?
Those are going to unfold over the course of the update to the housing element. So we will, the presentation on the 19th is a presentation and update on, number one, to give you an update on where we're at with respect to the RENA process, where we are with the housing element, really just what we think. We haven't set forth that work plan because the laws are very new and we're still figuring that out. We're going to share council's direction from the 10th. They gave some pretty specific, things that they wanted us to focus on. And then our proposal, for how we're going to parse this out. And I think that's part of the discussion with the commission, on what we're doing immediately, which is some of what you're seeing right now, and what is coming forward on, things that we have to work on together. Because this is, as you're noting, these are tough issues. This is complicated work.
And I'd like to put to you that you might consider a 2 or 3 option concept when you come to us, the one that might resolve the immediate issue, or 2 might go further, or 3 might be the extreme one. And I think of the parking in the downtown with the DCP, where you came with a minimal change, and we really wanted to go maximal change. And in fact, the council went maximal change.
And we will give you a sense of, what I'll call the urgency to do some things, and the less so on other things, based on the allocation. There's a lot of excitement around the 9,000 number, but you really have to dig into it and understand what is baked into that and what you really need to focus on within that. And there's a lot of, the work isn't done yet. It's February 2020, and we recognize we have our certification deadline of October. But as to how we get to the point of taking actions, we have to do this responsibly in terms of it's not just an opinion of what we think is the right thing. Maybe is 4 stories, that feels nice to everybody, but do we need more than that? Do we need less than that? We need to do the work to give you the information to know, what the right decision should be, to accommodate the allocation that we have. And that is going to take time, but that is work that necessarily has to unfold over the next year to 18 months to meet our deadline.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, but I think 18 months is, having lived through the zoning code, Tony, and the DCP, 18 months is an incredibly short period of time now. So the only lucky thing is we've done a lot of that work in the last 10 years over and over and over, and now we get to do it over one more time. But we now come to a crunch moment where some unpalatable things are about to occur in the context of the last 15 years in Santa Monica. So the quicker we reach that understanding of what those options might be, that where we've had 4 stories in a 3 point or 1.75 or a 2 or something in the downtown, that may have to change. What's that likely to be? Even if it's not 9,000 units, even if it was 4,500, that would be almost 3 times what we've been building over the last historic years. So there's a considerable change coming into the city. And we need to signal that, and we need to lay it out fairly clearly. This is the timetable we're working towards. If you want to make a contribution about height, density, what areas we build or don't build in, this is the moment.
Let's let staff do its work, right? I mean, I think I hear your message, and I think the message is loud and clear. And let's let staff do the work and continue to have this conversation.
There are 2 different. I mean, these are 2 somewhat different issues, right? There's the issue that you rightly raise, and I'm with you all the way in terms of wanting to move that as clearly as possible, and support staff in getting us there quickly. This is the piece of the puzzle that has to do with whatever those decisions are. How can we speed the process for the people who are trying to build the housing and open the businesses in Santa Monica, so that there's clarity and simplicity, and we can spend our time doing the things that you rightly said we ought to be spending our time doing?
No, I think it's the same discussion.
You think it's the same discussion?
It's absolutely the same discussion. Where do we have to chip in? What do we have to review?
Yeah.
How can we move it off our table so it doesn't, there's not a timetable or a calendar dependent moment that could or could not be met. So you hear people say all the time, well, I haven't got a planning commission date. That should not be the discussion point. As to whether or not the planning department has to do the work, of course they do, Commissioner Pastor. But we don't have the endless time that we seem to have had with the last couple of zoning things. There's a time-dependent thing, and we should also indicate that we're in a slightly different mindset now than we were for the other 2, which was we were in a reviewing mode at that stage. Everything above a certain height or something would come to us. Well, I think we have to change that.
Right. And we also are now in a regulatory environment statewide where the state is asking us to decide what we're willing to build and then to live by that, essentially, to create those envelopes, those height and density standards, and then allow people to produce within those standards. I don't want to lose sight of the CUP piece on the business side, because I think that's very important, and I think we again want to highlight those vacancies and see what we can be doing to make things easier. But this clearly is the priority piece on the housing side.
And I just, again, for Commissioner Pastor, I think, no, I'm not being objectionable.
I hear you. I just feel like
I actually hadn't finished, Commissioner.
Staff say about 10 times tonight that it is working on these things, that it is coming up with an agenda, that it is coming up with the plans. And I think we have to let staff do their job. And we're spending a lot of time listening to ourselves talk, quite honestly.
And since you haven't been here that long, as you keep pointing out, we are now marching in a different direction and taking a different set of decisions. And it's really important to flag that to our community, because unless the community comes with us, we don't get this done. And that's a significant part of what we do as a planning commission. That's why we're harping on it.
Well, then let's have a conversation, not tonight, but then let's have a conversation. I don't think most of the community watches planning commission, but I absolutely agree about but I think the people we need to reach are the people who don't watch planning commission, and getting the word out to those people, because I agree with you. We absolutely need to get the message out. And this idea that has been raised in different meetings, which is a great one, which is about, like, how do we bring the community along? We can't pretend that 9,000 units aren't going to be required. They're required. So how do we move the community along in that process? I would love to have more of that conversation.
Any other comments? So if it's all right, we will find ways to agendize this conversation in future meetings. But as we are particularly looking at this administrative approval question for February 19th, my request to you as colleagues is if you could think about those particular issues, I've raised a few, that we think council ought to consider as it looks at those red lines, so that staff has both clarity and the level of flexibility that we think is appropriate. That would be terrific. I think that would be a good first step. I think on both sides would be a good first step for us to communicate to council out of whatever we decide on the 19th. So with that, as this is a special meeting, there's no general public comment. So may I adjourn the meeting? Fantastic. The meeting is adjourned. We'll see you on the 19th.